All right, let's gear up for a climb, shall we? We're taking on high altitude and mountain climates in Chapter 7 of Sustainable Living Across Climates today.
You know, when you sent this chapter over, I really didn't expect to be so fascinated by it.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, we all think about how beautiful those places are, but living there sustainably, that adds a whole other layer of complexity.
Totally. It's one thing to enjoy a breathtaking view, but it's another thing entirely to deal with intense sun and frost that just pops up out of nowhere and water that wants to either vanish or cause a landslide.
And that's not even getting into the really unique challenges. Section 7.1 really hit me with how different mountain climates are compared to, well, anything else.
So break it down for me. What are we talking about here?
Okay, so imagine incredibly short growing seasons,
Okay.
frost that could make a cactus shiver, and terrain so steep that erosion is a constant threat.
Sounds like nature's trying to tell you to go live somewhere else.
Right.
So how do people even build homes that can handle all that?
That's where things get interesting. Section 7.2 goes into some amazing sustainable building solutions, and trust me, these aren't your typical houses.
Yeah, I'm guessing we're not talking about some drywall and a concrete foundation.
Not even close. Picture houses designed to resist crazy winds, the kind that can laugh at a hurricane.
Wow.
Sloped roofs for shedding snow, reinforced materials. It's like they built houses that are basically architectural mountain goats clinging to the slopes.
Okay, I'm starting to get the picture. But what about insulation? With those temperature swings, how do people stay comfortable?
Well, this is where they get really smart. They use what's called thermal mass, so the building materials actually help regulate the temperature.
Thermal mass.
Yeah. Like, think of a really thick stone wall, you know, the kind you see in a castle.
Got it.
So during the day, it absorbs all that intense sunlight and heat, like a natural battery. Then, as it gets cold at night, that stored heat slowly releases, keeping the place warm.
That's incredible.
Right. And it's not just for warmth. Thermal mass can work the other way, too, keeping things cool during the summer. It's all about harnessing the power of nature.
So they've figured out wind and temperature. What about the challenge of actually building on such steep terrain?
Well, that's where the brilliance of terracing comes in. Have you ever seen those pictures of rice paddies, like carved into the sides of mountains?
Yeah, they're stunning.
Well, they're using a similar idea for houses, building on these terraces to create level spots and stop erosion.
So they're not just building houses, they're reshaping the landscape.
Exactly. It's all about working with the terrain, not trying to fight it. And speaking of working with the terrain, let's talk about water management.
All right.
Because Section 7.3 shows that's another area where things get super interesting.
You know, reading through the chapter, it seems like water at high altitudes can be either a huge help or a huge problem.
Oh, absolutely. In the spring, you've got all this snow melt, which is great, until it becomes this raging river that could wash everything away.
It's like walking a tightrope.
It is. So how do these communities handle such an unpredictable water supply?
Tell me everything.
Well, they've come up with some seriously ingenious solutions. We're talking intricate snowmelt collection systems, erosion control that would make a beaver jealous.
Wait, are they really taking inspiration from beavers?
You bet. They're using natural materials and mimicking nature's own engineering.
That's so cool. I'm noticing a theme here. It's all about using nature as a guide instead of trying to force it to do what we want.
You got it. And that same idea shows up in their approach to agriculture, too.
Agriculture at high altitude. That sounds, well, difficult.
You'd think so, but Section 7.4 shows how these communities have actually figured out ways to grow food in some of the toughest conditions you can imagine.
I'm picturing rocky ground, thin air, crazy temperature changes. What kind of crops can even survive all that?
Well, they've focused on really hardy crops like quinoa and potatoes.
Those are some tough plants.
They are, but it's not just about the crops, it's also about how they're grown. Remember those terraced fields we were talking about?
The ones that turn mountains into giant staircases.
Yep. Those terraces aren't just pretty to look at. They're key for maximizing all that precious farmland and preventing erosion. It's like they've turned the mountains into gardens.
Amazing. So they're building smart, handling water like experts, and even growing food in what seems impossible. But what about energy? You can't exactly run power lines up the side of a mountain.
Now, this is where Section 7.5 gets really exciting. High-altitude living has some unexpected advantages when it comes to renewable energy.
You got my attention.
Okay, so picture this. Tons of sunshine, powerful winds ripping through the mountains, and streams rushing down the slopes.
Sounds like a recipe for some awesome clean energy.
Right. They're using solar panels to capture that sunshine, turbines for those strong winds, and even hydropower from the streams.
It's like they're plugged right into nature's power grid.
Exactly, but they're not stopping there. They're also experimenting with some cutting-edge thermal energy storage solutions.
Like that thermal mass idea we were talking about, but for energy.
You got it. Think of it as a natural battery for your house, powered by the sun. It's a way to store energy during the day and use it at night for heat or even to power appliances.
Wow, that's next level.
It is. And what's even more impressive is how they're combining all these different energy sources to create a system that can adapt to whatever the weather throws at them.
So even if there's no sun or wind, they've got backup power from the hydropower or those thermal batteries.
Right. It's all about creating a balanced and sustainable energy system.
It sounds like these high-altitude communities are leading the way when it comes to renewable energy.
They really are, which makes you wonder, what can we learn from them?
That's a great question, and one I'm definitely looking forward to diving into.
Me too. You know, coming back to it, those high-altitude energy solutions are just incredible.
I know. It's like they've figured out how to not only live, but thrive in these super harsh environments. But I've been wondering, are these just one-off things, or can these innovations work on a larger scale?
That's a really great question, and actually something the chapter makes you think about. What's interesting is that we're already seeing a lot of these ideas being used in other climates.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
That's awesome. Like what?
Take thermal mass as an example. Those thick stone walls that keep those mountainy houses warm in the winter and cool in the summer.
Yeah, that was super interesting. So you're saying those same ideas could be used in places with more, I don't know, normal temperatures.
Exactly. You see architects and builders using thermal mass more and more in energy-efficient homes these days. It's all about designing buildings that can naturally control the temperature inside, so we don't have to rely so much on things like air conditioning.
Which is great for the environment, especially with all the energy those systems use, especially in the summer when it's like 1,000,000 degrees.
Right. It's a perfect example of how solutions from high altitudes can inspire more sustainable ways of living in all kinds of places. And then there's terraced farming. You remember those amazing stepped fields built into the mountains?
Yeah, they're so cool. So it's not just a mountain thing.
Nope. People are actually bringing back this ancient technique and using it in hilly areas all around the world. It's a brilliant way to deal with erosion, use sloped land effectively, and even create little microclimates that can make the growing season longer.
That's amazing, especially with climate change and more landslides from all the rain we've been getting.
It really shows how traditional knowledge can offer solutions to problems we face today. And it's not just practical, it's beautiful too. Can you imagine turning all those bare hills into these lush, terraced gardens?
It would be like living in a painting.
And the benefits go beyond just how it looks. Terraced farming can increase biodiversity, make water management better, and create this more harmonious relationship with the land. It's a really well-rounded approach.
Okay, now I'm starting to see the bigger picture.
Yeah.
It's not just about isolated inventions. It's about a whole new way of thinking.
You got it. It's about looking at nature, learning from it, and using those lessons to find more sustainable ways to live.
Which brings us back to those incredible energy solutions. Solar and wind power make sense at high altitudes, but what about everywhere else?
Well, the interesting thing is how they're mixing these technologies with more traditional energy sources. Like some communities are combining hydropower with solar and wind to create these super reliable energy systems.
So even when the sun's not out or there's no wind, they've still got power.
Exactly. It's about having a variety of energy sources so they can adapt to whatever happens. And let's not forget about that thermal energy storage idea, that natural battery that uses the sun.
That was mind-blowing.
Yeah.
Could they actually use that to power whole communities?
It's something people are definitely researching and working on right now. Imagine storing solar energy from the summer to heat homes in the winter, or using extra wind energy to charge those thermal batteries.
It would be like a giant backup power system for everyone.
Exactly, and it would totally change how we think about energy storage. But here's the most important thing to remember about all these high-altitude innovations. They're not just about the technology. They're about being resourceful, adaptable, and having a deep respect for the natural world.
It's like working with what you have, respecting the environment, and finding creative solutions.
You nailed it. It's a different way of thinking. Instead of trying to conquer nature, we can learn from it and work together with it.
And that's something we can all do, whether we're living in the mountains or in a city.
Absolutely. So you're saying the real takeaway isn't just about some cool technology, but a totally different way of looking at things.
Exactly. It's about embracing those values of resilience, ingenuity, and respect for nature that we see in high altitude communities and figuring out how to use them in our own lives, no matter where we live or what the climate's like.
It's a call to be more aware, more creative, and more connected to the world around us.
And you know, it's really inspiring. These high altitude communities are showing us that it can be done. They're not just surviving, they're thriving in some of the toughest places on Earth.
Which means we can too, if we're willing to learn from them and use those lessons in our own lives.
Totally agree. It makes sustainable living seem less like a chore and more like an exciting adventure.
It is. That's what makes it so fascinating and so hopeful. It's all about finding inspiration, sharing what we know, and working together to create a better future.
On that note, I think it's time to start wrapping up our high altitude exploration.
Let's leave our listener with a few things to think about.
Okay, we're back and ready to wrap up our exploration of high altitude living.
It's been quite a journey, hasn't it?
It really has, and I gotta say, my perspective has definitely shifted.
I know what you mean. It's amazing to see how people can not only overcome those challenges, but turn them into opportunities.
It's like a reminder that even when things seem impossible, there's always a way forward.
And often, that way forward involves looking to nature for answers.
You know, as we've been talking, one word keeps popping into my head: resilience.
Resilience.
Yes.
It's the key to living sustainably, especially in these tough, high-altitude environments.
And it's not just about bouncing back from problems. It's about seeing them coming, adapting, and even using them to your advantage.
Exactly. Those mountain communities, they have resilience built into everything they do.
They have to, right? To survive in those conditions.
They do. And it's not just about physical resilience, it's social and cultural too.
Oh, that's a good point. It's about how they depend on each other, share knowledge, and keep those traditions that have helped them for generations.
Absolutely. It's about community working together and having a shared purpose.
Which makes me wonder, how can we build that same kind of resilience in our own lives, even if we're not living on a mountain?
That's the big question, isn't it? And I think it starts with understanding that resilience isn't something you achieve, it's a process.
So it's not about becoming invincible, it's about becoming more adaptable.
Exactly. It's about being open to change, trying new things, and not being afraid to ask for help.
You know, thinking about all these different aspects of high altitude living, it really strikes me how interconnected everything is.
It's a holistic approach, for sure. They get that you can't just solve one problem without thinking about the whole system.
Everything's connected, from the buildings to the water to the energy.
And that's a powerful lesson for all of us, whether we're dealing with climate change, social issues, or just trying to live more sustainably.
It's about seeing the big picture, recognizing those connections, and understanding that everything we do has an impact.
So as we finish up our high-altitude deep dive, I want to leave you with one last question.
What are those connections in your own life? And how can you use them to build more resilience, both for yourself and your community?
Now that's something to think about. It reminds us that sustainable living isn't just about actions, it's about how we think.
It's about changing our perspective, using those high-altitude values, and figuring out how to apply them to our own situations.
Let's take that inspiration, that sense of possibility, and carry it with us as we continue our own sustainable living journeys.
Absolutely. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, and until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and stay curious.